John Bishop lived a life of quietude, a stark contrast to the explosive chaos that had once defined him. His days were now measured by the rhythmic ebb and flow of the Chao Phraya River, the gentle sway of palm trees in the Bangkok breeze, and the muted calls of street vendors hawking their wares. That he resided in a modest, stilted house overlooking a klong, a narrow canal teeming with life. Far removed from the concrete jungles and geopolitical battlefields he once navigated, Thailand was his sanctuary, a place to bury the ghosts of his past and find a semblance of peace. But peace, like sand through clenched fingers, was proving difficult to hold on to. Bishop was a ghost himself, a shadow of the man he used to be. Once a highly decorated special forces operative, a lethal weapon honed to perfection, he was now John Bishop, a man trying to forget. He spent his days tending a small orchid garden, the delicate blooms a fragile counterpoint to the brutal efficiency he once embodied. He frequented the local markets, bartering for fresh produce and exchanging polite smiles with the vendors, careful to keep his past hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. He even tried meditation, guided by a wizened monk in a nearby temple, seeking solace in the ancient teachings. But the images still flickered behind his eyelids, the faces of the fallen, the screams of the innocent, the weight of responsibility that had crushed him. The mission that haunted him most was code-named Operation Nightingale, a humanitarian effort in a war-torn African nation. It had gone horribly wrong that a supposed safe zone turned into a killing field, innocent civilians caught in the crossfire, and Bishop, leading the team, forced to make impossible choices. That he had followed orders, done what he thought was right, but the consequences had been devastating. The weight of those decisions, the knowledge that he had contributed to the suffering, had driven him to the edge. That he left the service, disillusioned and broken, seeking anonymity and redemption in the anonymity of Bangkok. That he deliberately avoided anything that might trigger his past. Loud noises, crowds, even the smell of diesel fuel could send him spiraling back into the darkness. That he kept fit, of course, the training ingrained in his muscle memory, but he avoided weapons, preferring the simple discipline of Tai Chi to the explosive power of firearms. He learned to speak Thai fluently, immersing himself in the culture, trying to build a new identity, brick by painstaking brick. His only real connection to the world was Mia, a bright, spirited girl who lived with her grandmother in a neighboring house. Mia was a ray of sunshine in Bishop's self-imposed gloom, her laughter a melody that chased away the shadows. He helped her with her English lessons, shared stories of his sanitized travels, and even taught her a few basic self-defense moves, a subconscious attempt to protect her from the dangers he knew lurked in the city's underbelly. That he saw in her a reflection of the innocence he had tried so hard to protect in the past, a chance to make amends, to atone for his sins. He knew, deep down, that his peace was fragile, a thin veil stretched over a simmering volcano. The skills he had tried to bury were still there, dormant but not dead, and the world, as it always did, had a way of dragging him back in. The storm was brewing, the darkness was gathering, and John Bishop, the retired operative, was about to be forced to confront the ghosts he had tried so desperately to escape. The quiet life was about to end. The humid Bangkok air hung heavy, thick with the scent of jasmine and diesel. That it was a Tuesday, like any other. Bishop had just returned from the market, a basket of fresh mangoes and sticky rice in hand, intending to surprise Mia with her favorite treat. He approached her grandmother's house, the familiar creak of the wooden steps announcing his arrival. But the usual sounds of Mia's laughter and her grandmother's gentle scolding were absent. An unnerving silence hung in the air. He called out, "Mia, Grandma?" His voice echoed in the stillness. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He quickened his pace, climbing the steps two at a time. The front door was ajar, a detail that sent a shiver down his spine. He pushed it open, his senses on high alert, the years of training kicking in instinctively. The house was a mess. Furniture overturned, cushions ripped, and a scattering of broken pottery littered the floor. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood. Bishop's heart hammered against his ribs. He moved cautiously, his eyes scanning every corner, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He found Mia's grandmother in the back room, tied and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. He quickly freed her, his hands trembling slightly. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. The old woman, struggling to speak, managed to choke out. "They took her. They took Mia. Men. Big men." Her words were fragmented, punctuated by sobs. Bishop knelt beside her, his face grim. "Who took her? Do you know who they were?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I don't know. They just came, looking for something. They couldn't find it. Then they took Mia." The something they were looking for. That detail resonated deeply with Bishop. It wasn't a random act of violence. This was targeted. But why Mia? What could she possibly have that anyone would want? He examined the scene more closely, his trained eyes picking up details that others would miss: a muddy footprint near the window, a torn piece of fabric snagged on a nail, a faint trace of a chemical scent lingering in the air. These were clues, breadcrumbs leading him down a dark and dangerous path. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was something far more sinister. The brutality of the scene, the methodical way they had ransacked the house, the fact that they had taken Mia despite not finding what they were looking for. It all pointed to one thing: human trafficking. His blood ran cold. He knew the horrors of that world, the depravity and cruelty that lurked beneath the glittering surface of Bangkok. He had encountered it before, during his time in the service, and the memories were enough to make his stomach churn. He looked at Mia's grandmother, her eyes pleading for help. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't stand idly by while Mia was dragged into that abyss. He had tried to leave that life behind, but it was clear that it wasn't finished with him. He had a debt to pay, a wrong to right. The quiet life was over. John Bishop, the retired operative, was gone. In his place stood something else, something darker, something far more dangerous. The hunter had awakened. "I'll find her," he said, his voice steely, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "I promise you, I'll bring her back." He knew the odds were stacked against him. He was one man against a powerful and ruthless organization. But he had something they didn't: a burning desire for justice and a skill set honed by years of experience. He was going to tear Bangkok apart piece by piece until he found Mia. The criminal underworld was about to learn that John Bishop was not a man to be trifled with. The promise hung in the air, a vow etched in steel. Bishop knew finding Mia wouldn't be easy. The human trafficking network in Bangkok was a labyrinthine web of deceit and violence, shrouded in secrecy and protected by powerful figures that he couldn't go to the police. Not yet. That he needed information, and that meant tapping into his old network, the shadowy world he had tried so hard to leave behind. He started with a visit to the Serpent's Tooth, a dingy bar tucked away in the heart of Patpong, Bangkok's infamous red light district. It was a place where secrets were traded like currency, and whispers could buy you anything, or get you killed. The bar was dimly lit, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the pungent aroma of cheap whiskey. Faces lurked in the shadows, eyes darting nervously, each with a story to tell. Bishop recognized a few familiar faces, men and women who had once been his allies, his informants, his confidants. He approached a burly man with a scarred face and a gold tooth, known only as Razor. Razor had been a valuable source of information during Bishop's time in the service, a man with connections to every corner of the city's underworld. "Razor," Bishop said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's been a while." Razor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition in their depths. "Bishop, I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Bishop replied. "I need your help." He explained Mia's kidnapping, omitting the details of his past, focusing only on the facts. Razor listened intently, his expression unreadable. "Human trafficking," Razor said finally, his voice a low rumble. "That's Kridos's territory." The name hung in the air, heavy with menace. Kridos. Bishop had heard whispers of him before, a ruthless kingpin who controlled a vast empire of vice and exploitation. But he was a ghost, a legend, rarely seen but always felt. "Kridos is involved?" Bishop asked, his grip tightening on his glass. "He runs the show," Razor confirmed. "He has eyes and ears everywhere. Crossing him is a death sentence." Bishop wasn't deterred. He had faced death before, stared it down, and laughed in its face. "I need to know where Mia is. That I need to know Kridos's operation." Razor hesitated. "That's dangerous, Bishop, even for you." Bishop placed a thick wad of Thai baht on the table. Information has a price. Razor that I'm willing to pay it. Razor's eyes flickered to the money, then back to Bishop's determined face. He knew Bishop was serious. He knew that crossing him would be just as dangerous as crossing Krydos. All right, Razor said. I'll see what I can find, but I make no promises. Over the next few days, Bishop worked tirelessly, piecing together information from various sources. He revisited old haunts, interrogated contacts, and used his skills in surveillance and reconnaissance to gather intelligence. He discovered that Krydos' operation was far more sophisticated than he had imagined. That IT was a well-oiled machine, with layers of protection and a network that stretched far beyond Bangkok. He learned that Krydos specialized in trafficking young women from rural villages, luring them with promises of jobs and a better life, only to trap them in a cycle of exploitation and abuse. That he ran brothels, gambling dens, and drug operations, all fueled by the suffering of others. He was a monster, a parasite preying on the vulnerable. Bishop also discovered that Krydos had powerful allies, corrupt officials and wealthy businessmen who turned a blind eye to his activities in exchange for a share of the profits. He was untouchable, protected by a wall of money and influence. But Bishop wasn't afraid. He had faced worse odds before. He was a force of nature, a one-man army. He was going to tear down Krydos' empire, brick by brick, until he found Mia. He would use his fists, his firepower, and his fury to bring justice to the shadows. The game had begun. The information Razor provided led Bishop to a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place rumored to be a holding pen for Krydos' victims before they were shipped off to various brothels and gambling dens. Bishop knew he couldn't wait any longer. He needed to act, to disrupt Krydos' operation and send a clear message. He was coming. He spent hours studying the warehouse, observing the guards, analyzing the security measures. He planned his attack meticulously, calculating every move, every angle. He was a surgeon of violence, precise and efficient. As darkness fell, Bishop approached the warehouse. A ghost in the shadows, he moved silently, his footsteps muffled by the dirt and grime that he bypassed. The perimeter security with ease, his years of training allowing him to slip through unnoticed. He took out the first guard with a swift, silent strike, a pressure point attack that rendered him unconscious before he could raise the alarm. That he moved through the warehouse like a phantom, disabling cameras, silencing alarms, and eliminating guards with brutal efficiency. Inside, the scene was horrifying. Young women, their faces gaunt and hollow, were huddled together in cramped, filthy cages. Their eyes were filled with despair, their spirits broken. Bishop's heart clenched with rage. He moved quickly, unlocking the cages, freeing the women. "Get out of here," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "Run, don't look back." The women, hesitant at first, obeyed his command, scrambling out of the cages and fleeing into the night. But the alarm had been raised. Reinforcements were arriving, alerted by the commotion. Bishop found himself surrounded by Krydos' men, a horde of thugs armed with knives, clubs, and guns. He didn't hesitate. He launched himself into the fray. A whirlwind of fists and fury. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his movements fluid and deadly. He disarmed opponents with lightning speed, using their own weapons against them. He broke bones, shattered jaws, and left a trail of unconscious bodies in his wake. His fighting style was a brutal mix of martial arts and street fighting, honed by years of experience in the world's deadliest conflict zones. He was a force to be reckoned with, a one-man wrecking crew. The fight was chaotic and brutal, a symphony of violence. Bishop took his share of blows, but he kept fighting, fueled by adrenaline and a burning desire to find Mia. He systematically cleared the warehouse, leaving no one standing. But Mia wasn't there. The realization hit him hard, a wave of disappointment washing over him. He had saved some victims, but he had failed to find the one he was looking for. Before leaving, Bishop made sure to leave a message for Krydos. He took a knife and carved a symbol into the wall, a symbol that Krydos would recognize, the mark of the nightingale, a reminder of Bishop's past and a warning of what was to come. He left the warehouse, leaving behind a scene of carnage and chaos. He had sent a message to Krydos, a message that he wouldn't be ignored, a message that he was coming for him. The hunt was on. The aftermath of the warehouse raid was significant. News spread quickly through the Bangkok underworld, whispers of a ghost from the past returning to settle scores. Krydos would be furious, and Bishop knew he had to be prepared for retaliation. But he also knew he couldn't do this alone, that he needed resources. Information that his underworld contacts couldn't provide, that he needed someone on the inside. That's when Inspector Anya Sharma entered the picture, a driven and incorruptible officer in the Royal Thai Police. Anya had been investigating Krydos for years, meticulously gathering evidence, building a case that could bring the kingpin down, but her efforts had been consistently thwarted, her leads mysteriously drying up, her requests for resources denied. She was fighting a losing battle against a system rigged in Krydos' favor. Anya had been at the scene of the warehouse raid, the nightingale symbol instantly catching her attention. She knew the stories, the legends surrounding John Bishop, the operative who had vanished years ago. She suspected he was back, and she suspected he was after Krydos. She tracked Bishop down to a safe house he was using, a nondescript apartment in a quiet neighborhood. She approached him cautiously, her gun holstered but her eyes wary. "John Bishop?" she asked, her voice firm but respectful. Bishop turned, his expression guarded. He recognized her immediately, the determined look in her eyes, the badge glinting beneath her jacket. "Inspector," he acknowledged, his voice neutral. "I know what you're doing," Anya said. "I know about Mia, and I know about Krydos." Bishop didn't respond, waiting for her to continue. "I've been investigating Krydos for years," Anya explained. "I have evidence, connections, but I lack the resources to take him down. He's too powerful, too well protected." "So why are you here?" Bishop asked, his eyes narrowing. "Looking to arrest me?" "No," Anya replied. "I'm here to offer you a partnership." Bishop raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "A partnership? With the police?" "I know you work outside the law," Anya said. "But we have a common goal, to bring Krydos to justice and rescue Mia. Together, we might actually stand a chance." Bishop considered her offer. He didn't trust cops, not after what he had seen, what he had done. But he recognized the sincerity in Anya's eyes, the genuine desire to do good. And he knew she had resources he desperately needed. "What do you bring to the table?" he asked. Anya smiled slightly. "Information, access to police files, knowledge of Krydos' network, and a team of officers I can trust." Bishop weighed his options. He could continue working alone, relying on his own skills and resources. But partnering with Anya would give him a significant advantage. It was a risk, but it might be the only way to save Mia. "All right," he said finally. "I'm in, but on my terms. I call the shots." Anya nodded. "Agreed. But we do this by the book, as much as possible. I won't compromise my principles." The unlikely alliance was formed. Bishop, the rogue operative, and Anya, the determined detective, joined forces to take down Krydos. They were an odd couple, their methods and motivations often clashing. But they were united by a common purpose: to bring justice to the shadows and rescue Mia from the clutches of evil. The game had changed. Now, it was a team effort. But could Bishop truly trust Anya? Time would tell. With Anya's resources now at his disposal, Bishop began to systematically dissect Krydos' network. Anya provided him with access to police files, surveillance reports, and informant contacts, painting a clearer picture of the kingpin's vast and complex operation. Bishop, in turn, shared his underworld knowledge, identifying weaknesses in Krydos' security and pinpointing key figures within his organization. Their investigation led them down a rabbit hole of corruption and deceit, revealing a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Bangkok society. They discovered that Krydos had been bribing corrupt officials for years, ensuring that his activities were protected from scrutiny. He had powerful allies in the police force, the judiciary, and even the government, all benefiting from his illicit empire. One of their first breakthroughs came when Anya uncovered a ledger detailing Krydos' payoffs to various officials. The ledger was encrypted, but Bishop, with his expertise in code breaking, was able to decipher it. The names listed in the ledger were shocking, revealing the extent of Krydos' influence. They also discovered that Krydos had been laundering money through a network of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Anya traced the flow of money, Uncovering a web of financial transactions that implicated several prominent businessmen and politicians, they delved deeper into the conspiracy. Bishop and Anya faced increasing danger. They were constantly being watched. Their phones were tapped, and their movements were tracked. Krydos knew they were closing in, and he was determined to stop them. One night, Anya's apartment was raided by Krydos' men. They ransacked the place, searching for evidence, but Anya managed to escape unharmed. The raid was a clear warning, a message that they were playing a dangerous game. Bishop and Anya realized they couldn't trust anyone. They had to be careful to protect themselves and their sources. They operated in secret, communicating through encrypted channels and meeting in discreet locations. Their investigation led them to a prominent judge, Justice Statham, who had been instrumental in dismissing several cases against Krydos. Anya obtained evidence that Statham had been receiving large sums of money from Krydos in exchange for his favorable rulings. They also uncovered evidence linking Krydos to a powerful senator, Senator Narong, who had been using his political influence to protect Krydos' interests. Narong had been lobbying against legislation that would crack down on human trafficking, ensuring that Krydos' operation could continue to thrive. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous their situation became. Bishop and Anya knew that they were walking a tightrope. One wrong step could send them plummeting to their deaths. But they couldn't stop now. They had come too far, uncovered too much. They were determined to expose the conspiracy and bring Krydos and his protectors to justice. The stakes were higher than ever, but the reward, rescuing Mia and dismantling Krydos' empire, was worth the risk. Armed with the information they had gathered, Bishop and Anya launched a series of strategic strikes aimed at crippling Krydos' operation. They knew they couldn't take him down head-on. They had to dismantle his empire piece by piece, weakening him before delivering the final blow. Their first target was Krydos' finances. Anya used her connections within the police force to freeze his known bank accounts and seize his assets. Bishop, meanwhile, targeted his money laundering network, disrupting the flow of funds through his shell corporations and offshore accounts. They exposed his financial dealings to the media, causing a public outcry and putting pressure on his corrupt allies. Next, they focused on disrupting his supply lines. Krydos relied on a network of smugglers to transport his victims from rural villages to Bangkok. Bishop and Anya identified these routes and launched covert operations to intercept the smugglers, freeing the enslaved women and shutting down their operations. They also targeted Krydos' drug supply, raiding his warehouses and seizing his shipments, crippling his ability to finance his other activities. But perhaps their most effective strategy was eliminating Krydos' key lieutenants. These were the men who ran his various operations, enforcing his will and carrying out his dirty work. Bishop, with his lethal skills, systematically targeted these individuals, taking them out one by one. He started with Victor, Krydos' head of security, a ruthless and brutal man who was responsible for protecting his operation. Bishop tracked Victor to a secluded nightclub, where he was known to frequent. He infiltrated the club, taking out Victor's bodyguards before confronting him in a private room. The ensuing fight was short and brutal, ending with Victor's demise. Next, he targeted Madame Rose, who ran Krydos' network of brothels. She was a cunning and ruthless woman who had made a fortune exploiting young women. Bishop infiltrated her operation, freeing the women and exposing her crimes to the authorities. Madame Rose was arrested and her brothels were shut down, dealing a significant blow to Krydos' operation. Finally, he targeted the Butcher, Krydos' chief enforcer, a sadistic killer who was responsible for intimidating and eliminating his enemies. Bishop tracked the Butcher to a remote training camp, where he was preparing a new group of recruits. He launched a surprise attack on the camp, taking out the Butcher and his entire team. With each strategic strike, Bishop and Anya weakened Krydos' operation, chipping away at his power and influence. They were sending him a clear message. His empire was crumbling, and they were coming for him. But Krydos wasn't going down without a fight. That he retaliated with increasing violence, targeting Bishop and Anya and their allies. The stakes were higher than ever, and the battle was far from over. But Bishop and Anya were determined to see it through, to bring Krydos to justice and rescue Mia from the clutches of evil. The final showdown was looming. The strategic strikes had taken a toll on Krydos' operation, But they hadn't brought Bishop any closer to finding Mia. The frustration was mounting, the fear gnawing at him. He pushed himself harder, working longer hours, poring over every piece of intelligence, desperate for a lead. Then, a breakthrough point: one of Anya's informants, a low-level thug who had been feeding her information for years, came forward with a crucial piece of information. He claimed that Mia was being held in Kratos' headquarters, a heavily fortified compound located on a remote island in the Chao Phraya River. The informant had never been inside the compound himself, but he had heard rumors. Whispers of a secret prison where Kratos kept his most valuable assets and his most troublesome enemies. He described the compound as a fortress, surrounded by walls, armed guards, and sophisticated security systems. Bishop felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of hope and dread. He had finally found Mia, but she was being held in the most dangerous place imaginable, a place where Kratos felt invincible. The news transformed the mission for Bishop. It was no longer just about dismantling Kratos' operation or bringing him to justice. It was about rescuing Mia, about protecting the innocent girl who had become his only connection to humanity. The mission had become deeply personal. He shared the information with Anya, who immediately began to gather intelligence on Kratos' headquarters. She accessed satellite images, security schematics, and personnel files, trying to find a weakness, an opening that Bishop could exploit. The compound was a formidable obstacle. It was surrounded by high walls, topped with razor wire and patrolled by armed guards. The only access point was a heavily guarded gate, protected by biometric scanners and surveillance cameras. Inside, the compound was divided into several zones, each with its own security measures. Anya discovered that Kratos himself was rarely at the compound, preferring to conduct his business from a safe distance. But she also learned that his second-in-command, a ruthless and sadistic man named Jaffer, was in charge of security at the compound. Jaffer was known for his brutality and his unwavering loyalty to Kratos. Bishop knew that rescuing Mia from the compound would be the most dangerous mission of his life. He would be facing overwhelming odds, and the slightest mistake could cost him everything. But he was determined to do whatever it took to save her. He began to plan his assault, meticulously studying the layout of the compound, analyzing the security measures, and identifying potential entry points that he knew he couldn't go in guns blazing. He needed a plan, a strategy that would allow him to slip through the defenses undetected and rescue Mia before Kratos or Jaffer could react. He spent hours practicing his skills, honing his reflexes, and preparing his mind for the challenges ahead. He knew he would have to be at his best, both physically and mentally, to succeed. The mission had become more than just a job for Bishop. It was a test of his resolve, a measure of his humanity. It was a chance to redeem himself for the mistakes of his past and to protect the innocent from the darkness that threatened to consume them. He was ready to face the danger, to confront his demons, and to fight for what he believed in. Mia's life depended on it. The plan was meticulously crafted. Anya had provided detailed schematics of Kratos' compound, highlighting blind spots in the security system and identifying a rarely used service entrance that Bishop could exploit. She had even arranged for a diversion, a coordinated police raid, on a nearby gambling den, to draw attention away from the island. Bishop trusted the plan, trusted Anya, or so he thought. As he approached the service entrance, a sense of unease crept over him. The area was too quiet, too deserted. The promised diversion seemed suspiciously muted. He paused, his senses on high alert, his years of experience screaming at him that something was wrong. He tried to contact Anya on his encrypted comms channel, but there was no response. He tried again and again, but the line remained dead. A cold dread washed over him. He decided to proceed with caution, moving slowly and deliberately, his hand resting on the knife strapped to his thigh. As he rounded a corner, he saw them. A group of heavily armed men, waiting in ambush. They were wearing police uniforms, but Bishop recognized their faces. They were Kratos' men, the same thugs he had fought at the warehouse. The trap had been sprung. Before he could react, the men opened fire. Bishop dove for cover, bullets whizzing past his head. He returned fire, his movements swift and deadly, taking down several of his attackers. But he was outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. He fought his way back the way he had come, his skills and training allowing him to hold off the attackers. But he knew he couldn't win this fight. He had to escape, to regroup, to figure out what had gone wrong. As he reached the perimeter of the compound, he saw her, Anya, standing beside Jaffer, watching the firefight unfold. Her expression was cold and calculating, betraying no hint of remorse. The truth hit Bishop like a physical blow. Anya had been working for Krydos all along. She had used him, manipulated him, fed him false information, and led him into a trap. The partnership, the shared goal, the trust, it had all been a lie. He felt a surge of rage, a white-hot fury that threatened to consume him. But he couldn't afford to give in to his emotions. He had to survive, to escape, to find a way to expose Anya's treachery and bring Krydos down. That he made a daring escape. Using his skills in parkour and stealth to evade his pursuers, that he scaled walls, leaped across rooftops, and navigated the maze-like streets of Bangkok. His every move calculated and precise. That he knew that Krydos would be hunting him, that he would be a marked man. But he also knew that he couldn't give up, that he had to find Mia, to rescue her from Krydos' clutches. And he had to make Anya pay for her betrayal. The betrayal shattered Bishop's trust in everyone. That he was alone again, hunted and betrayed. But he was also more determined than ever. He would use his skills, his intelligence, and his unwavering resolve to turn the tables on Krydos and Anya. The game had changed again. Now, it was personal. Betrayed and hunted, Bishop went underground, relying on his instincts and training to evade Krydos' relentless pursuit. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to act, to expose Anya's treachery and turn the tables on Krydos. He focused his efforts on gathering evidence of Anya's corruption. He revisited old contacts, tapped into his underworld network, and used his skills in surveillance and reconnaissance to uncover the truth. He discovered that Anya had been receiving payments from Krydos for years, in exchange for protecting his operation and sabotaging investigations. He found records of bank transfers, coded messages, and clandestine meetings, all pointing to her involvement in Krydos' criminal enterprise. That he knew he couldn't go to the authorities directly. Anya had too much influence, too many allies within the police force. He needed to find a way to expose her corruption to her colleagues, to convince them that she had betrayed their trust. He decided to target Captain Somchai, a respected officer who had worked closely with Anya. For years, Somchai was known for his integrity and his unwavering commitment to justice. Bishop believed that if he could convince Somchai of Anya's treachery, he could win back some allies within the police force. He arranged a clandestine meeting with Somchai, providing him with the evidence he had gathered against Anya. Somchai was shocked and dismayed by what he saw. That he couldn't believe that Anya, whom he had trusted and admired, could be capable of such betrayal. He agreed to help Bishop expose Anya's corruption. Together, they gathered more evidence, interviewing witnesses, analyzing financial records, and building a case that would be impossible to ignore. They presented their findings to a select group of officers they could trust, including Commander Rakhan, the head of the Serious Crimes Unit. Rakhan was initially skeptical, but the evidence was overwhelming. That he realized that Anya had been playing them all along, using her position to protect Krydos and sabotage their investigations. Rakhan authorized a covert operation to arrest Anya and bring her to justice. They planned to catch her in the act, receiving a payment from Krydos. The operation was a success. Anya was apprehended, caught red-handed with a briefcase full of cash. She was arrested and charged with corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the police force and the government. The media seized on the story, exposing the deep-seated corruption that had been festering for years. With Anya's treachery exposed, Bishop found himself with new allies within the police force. Somchai and Rakhan were now on his side, providing him with resources and support. They were determined to bring Krydos to justice and dismantle his criminal empire. But Bishop knew that Krydos wouldn't give up easily. That he would retaliate, using his remaining power and influence to protect himself. The final showdown was looming, and Bishop knew he had to be prepared for anything. That he had been betrayed, but he wasn't broken. He was more determined than ever to rescue Mia and bring Krydos to justice. The fight was far from over. With Anya behind bars and new allies within the police force, Bishop prepared for the final assault on Krydos' headquarters. Somchai and Rakan provided him with a team of trusted officers, weapons, and tactical support. They knew that Krytos would be expecting them, that he would have reinforced his defenses, but they were determined to bring him to justice and rescue Mia. Bishop knew that this wouldn't be a surgical strike like the warehouse raid. This would be a full-scale assault, a brutal and relentless battle against overwhelming odds that he prepared himself mentally and physically. Knowing that he would have to push himself to the limit to succeed, as darkness fell, Bishop and his team approached Krytos' island compound. They used a fleet of speedboats to navigate the Chao Phraya River. Approaching the island from an unexpected direction, they bypassed the main gate, landing on a secluded beach on the opposite side of the island. They moved silently through the jungle. Approaching the compound's perimeter, they encountered several patrols, but Bishop and his team quickly eliminated them. Using their skills in stealth and close-quarters combat, they reached the compound's walls, which were heavily fortified with razor wire and armed guards. Bishop used his expertise in explosives to breach the walls, creating an opening for his team to enter. The assault began. Bishop and his team stormed the compound, engaging Krytos' men in a fierce firefight. Bullets flew, explosions rocked the compound, and the air was filled with the screams of the wounded and dying. Bishop moved through the compound like a force of nature. His movements swift and deadly that he used his skills in martial arts and firearms. To take down his opponents with brutal efficiency, he punched, kicked, shot, and stabbed his way through the compound, leaving a trail of unconscious and lifeless bodies in his wake. His signature fighting style was on full display. A brutal mix of precision strikes, lightning-fast reflexes, and unwavering determination that he used his environment to his advantage, utilizing cover, improvisation, and sheer brute force to overcome his opponents. The battle raged for hours, a relentless and unforgiving onslaught. Bishop and his team faced wave after wave of Krytos' men, but they refused to give up. They fought with courage and conviction, fueled by their desire to bring justice to the shadows and rescue Mia from the clutches of evil. They fought their way deeper into the compound. Bishop's thoughts were solely on Mia. He pictured her face, her smile, her unwavering spirit. He knew he had to find her, to protect her, to bring her home. The assault was a symphony of violence, a testament to Bishop's unwavering determination and his lethal skills. He was a force to be reckoned with, a one-man army against a seemingly insurmountable foe. The final showdown was drawing near. After hours of relentless fighting, Bishop finally reached the heart of Krytos' headquarters, a luxurious penthouse suite overlooking the Chao Phraya River. He kicked down the door, his gun raised, ready for anything. There, standing by the window, was Krytos. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his face calm and composed, betraying no hint of fear. Beside him stood Jaffer, Krytos' ruthless second-in-command, holding a gun to Mia's head. "Well, Bishop," Krytos said, his voice smooth and menacing. "I must admit, I'm impressed. You've caused me a great deal of trouble." "Let her go, Krytos," Bishop said, his voice cold and steely. "This doesn't concern her." "On the contrary," Krytos replied. "She's the reason you're here, isn't she? She's the reason you've torn my empire apart." "This ends now," Bishop said, his grip tightening on his gun. "Perhaps," Krytos said, smirking, "but not the way you think." He nodded to Jaffer, who tightened his grip on Mia, causing her to cry out in pain. "If you take one more step, I'll kill her," Jaffer snarled. Bishop hesitated, his mind racing. He couldn't risk Mia's life. He lowered his gun, his expression grim. "That's better," Krytos said, his smirk widening. "Now, drop your weapon." Bishop slowly lowered his gun to the floor, his eyes fixed on Krytos. "Jaffer, kill him," Krytos ordered. Jaffer raised his gun, preparing to fire, but before he could pull the trigger, Bishop moved with lightning speed. He threw a knife, striking Jaffer in the hand, causing him to drop his gun. Then, he lunged at Krytos, tackling him to the ground. The two men grappled, exchanging blows in a furious struggle. Krytos was a formidable opponent, strong and ruthless. That he had been trained in martial arts and had years of experience in street fighting. But Bishop was faster, more skilled, and more determined. He dodged Krytos' blows, countering with his own strikes. He punched, kicked, and elbowed Krytos, weakening him with each blow. The fight spilled out onto the balcony, where the two men continued to struggle. They grappled near the edge, the dizzying drop to the river below a constant threat. Finally, Bishop managed to gain the upper hand. He pinned Krydos to the ground, his fist raised, ready to deliver the final blow. "Any last words?" Bishop asked, his voice low and menacing. Krydos spat in his face. "You'll never win," he gasped. "There will always be someone to take my place." Bishop hesitated for a moment, his face etched with anger and frustration. But then, he remembered Mia, her innocent face, her unwavering spirit. He knew what he had to do. He delivered the final blow, knocking Krydos unconscious. The fight was over. With Krydos unconscious, Bishop turned his attention to Jaffer, who was still holding Mia hostage. Jaffer's hand was bleeding from the knife wound, but his grip on Mia remained firm. "Let her go, Jaffer," Bishop said, his voice low and menacing. "It's over." Jaffer glared at Bishop, his eyes filled with hatred. "I'll never let you take her," he snarled. "She's Krydos' property." "She's a child, Jaffer," Bishop said. "She doesn't belong to anyone." "Shut up," Jaffer yelled, tightening his grip on Mia, causing her to scream in pain. Bishop knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't risk Mia's life any longer. He took a deep breath, focusing his mind, preparing for the final confrontation. That he moved with lightning speed, throwing another knife, this time aiming for Jaffer's gun hand. The knife struck its mark, causing Jaffer to drop his gun and release Mia. Mia ran to Bishop, throwing her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Bishop held her tightly, his heart filled with relief. Jaffer, enraged, lunged at Bishop, wielding a knife. Bishop dodged the attack, countering with a swift kick that sent Jaffer sprawling to the ground. He disarmed Jaffer. Taking the knife from his grasp, he stood over him, his expression grim. "It's over, Jaffer," Bishop said. "You're going to prison." He allowed Somchai and Rakan's team to apprehend Jaffer, securing the scene and ensuring Mia's safety. With Krydos and Jaffer in custody and Anya exposed, the trafficking ring was dismantled, its power and influence shattered. The police began the long process of identifying and rescuing the remaining victims, bringing them to safety and providing them with the support they needed to rebuild their lives. The corrupt officials and businessmen who had protected Krydos were exposed and brought to justice, their careers and reputations ruined. Justice had been served as the sun rose over Bangkok, casting a golden glow on the city. Bishop stood on the balcony, holding Mia in his arms. He looked out at the Chao Phraya River, its waters calm and peaceful. He had done it. He had rescued Mia, brought Krydos to justice, and dismantled his criminal empire. That he had faced his demons, confronted his past, and found a measure of redemption. He knew that the scars of his past would always remain, that the memories of his fallen comrades would never fade. But he also knew that he had made a difference, that he had protected the innocent and brought justice to the shadows. He looked down at Mia, her face still buried in his chest. He felt a surge of love and protectiveness, a desire to shield her from the darkness of the world. He knew that his life would never be the same. He had been changed by this experience, transformed by the love and trust of a little girl. He was no longer just John Bishop, the retired operative. He was something more. He was a protector, a guardian, a friend. The final act of violence had brought a measure of peace. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Krydos and his accomplices were brought to justice, their criminal empire dismantled. The rescued victims were given medical care, counseling, and a chance to rebuild their lives. The city of Bangkok breathed a collective sigh of relief, grateful to be free from the grip of corruption and fear. For Bishop, the ordeal had been transformative. He had faced his demons, confronted his past, and found a measure of peace and purpose. He had discovered that even in the darkest of shadows, there was still hope for redemption. He had considered leaving Bangkok, returning to his life of solitude, but he knew that he couldn't abandon Mia. She had become his family, his reason for being. That he couldn't leave her to face the world alone. He decided to stay in Thailand, to watch over Mia, to protect her from the dangers that still lurked in the shadows. He found a new home for them, a small house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by lush gardens and peaceful canals. He enrolled Mia in a good school, ensuring that she received the education she deserved. He helped her with her homework, taught her about the world, and shared stories of his sanitized adventures. He watched her grow, her spirit blossoming, her laughter filling his life with joy. He also continued to use his skills to protect the innocent. He worked with Somchai and Rakhan, helping them to combat crime and corruption in Bangkok. He became a silent guardian, a protector of the vulnerable, a force for good in a world filled with darkness. He never forgot the lessons he had learned, the sacrifices he had made, the battles he had fought. He carried the scars of his past, but he also carried the hope for a better future. He found a measure of peace in his new life, a sense of belonging he had never known before. He was no longer just John Bishop, the retired operative haunted by his past. He was a father figure, a friend, a protector. He was a man with a purpose. Years passed. Mia grew into a strong and independent young woman, ready to face the world on her own terms. She excelled in school, made